But I suspect that's got something to do with God. You know, the greatest understatement in the history of philosophy. So what I did was, when I read that passage, I got this idea, a little light went off, a little mini Pentecost moment. I thought, aha, well let's write that volume, like the sequel, because there's got to be a sequel which looks at that theory, the God theory, mathematically. Is it possible that God actually does somehow, you know, create or sustain or devise the equations that make gravity possible? And how? How would consciousness be able to affect, you know, what goes on at particle physics level in terms of gravity and, you know. So anyway, that's what I've been working on ever since for the last year, writing 3 volumes of my Philosophiae Religionis Principia Mathematica, which is my sequel to Newton's work. And it's extremely interesting, and as a hypothesis I propose that yes, that there is a divine intelligence or a super consciousness that underlies all the mathematical laws that make gravity possible, that make the sun possible, that make light possible, and that make time and space possible. Even Newton said that. You know, Newton changed a lot of things about... Newton definitely said it, but Einstein also said it. Einstein changed a lot of things about Newton, but he kept the God thing. He said that he believed in the God of Spinoza. And, you know, so do I. So does anyone who's actually studied these matters. And so does the Quran. So all the Quran is saying here is actually God underwrites day and night, gravity, and the sky. But more than that, he's given you shape and made your shapes beautiful. Now this is sacred geometry, my friends. This is the beauty of form. The patterns which you see in an Islamic mosque, or you see it in a Christian church, or you see it in the art history traditions of humanity, right from the earliest cave paintings of Lascaux right down to Mondrian, Picasso and whatever. Beauty is what makes life living worthwhile. And the beauty of each other is why we fall in love with each other again and again, life after life. And, you know, the human form is beautiful. It's amazing because it can do so much stuff, and yet it's not very big. I mean, and if you are a lover, you love your beloved's shape. You know, I happen to be heterosexual, so I find the female shape beautiful. And, you know, I love it. And that, what the Quran is saying here is that's natural and divinely ordained. That's, you know, you're supposed to find each other beautiful because you are beautiful. Because each of you is imbued with that divinity of the divine intelligence. And that's what sacred geometry studies, and sacred topology, which is a branch of modern mathematics and algebra, topology which involves many dimensions, the study of shapes. It's now very, very advanced. It's interesting. So is there a topology to all the religions? Do they have different shapes? This is one of the things I've speculated in my book, Principia, Mathematica. If you were a sculptor like Barbara Hepworth, and I commissioned you to make 168 sculptures to put in a park of world faiths, you know, what would they be shaped like, each one? You know, there's a challenge to any sculptures out there. Well, it could be met because the divine geometry of shape shows how each is beautiful in its own way. And nowadays, with you know, installation art, you could have a field day creating those 168 sculptures. I challenge anyone out there who's an artist, just make 1 or 2. Also, that divine intelligence provides for our sustenance of things pure and good. Well, thank you. You know, we all have, well, touch wood, I hope the people of Gaza are going to get supplies in. You know, we need to ensure that everybody has the sustenance. It's the promise of God. Each of us should have access to food, nourishment. And it doesn't mean just sustenance physically, like eating and drinking. It means also intellectually. We need, as Christ said, we don't live just on bread. You know, we live on ideas of truth and the word of truth, which is what Pentecost is all about. And we have a fractured world in which the word has been broken. So people go around saying, I'm a Muslim, I'm a Jew, I'm a Christian, this, that, or the other, and I hate you, so I'm going to drop bombs on you. I mean, how primitive is that? That's like kids in the playground. We should all be in love with the common word, as the Jordanian Interfaith Initiative is called, from the King of Jordan, which I deeply honour, and that the University of Cambridge Centre for Islamic Studies has taken a role in doing. It's a bit like my Interfaith Peace Treaty, but it's focusing mainly on how Islam can join that conversation about universality and difference, so that each tradition is different, it has its different lineage and colour and so on, but they're all universal. They're part of one overall cartography. Such is God, your Lord. So glory to God, the Lord of the worlds. You know, this is an amazing ending to this incredible little verse, which to me sums up the entirety of the Quran. And the Quran is like that. Each verse is a sort of fractal of the whole message. And within each fractal, as Mandelbrot pointed out, the great theorist of chaos theory, who was Jewish, and he lived in France during World War II. He escaped from Nazi persecution by hiding out with a rabbi near me, where I live, who looked after him and taught him advanced maths, because he was also a mathematician. And later Mandelbrot went to work for IBM and discovered fractals and the sacred geometry of the infinite. And this is what the Quran is also about, in terms of each little verse reflects the whole. So do all sacred scriptures, so does the Bible, the best bits of it, and so do the Upanishads and the Buddha Sutras. In my commentary on the Dhammapada, I've made that plain. But what's this glory to God? What do you mean, glory to God? I love the word glory. It's a very powerful word, actually. It's sort of gone out of English language. In Old Anglo-Saxon, it was called Waldor. Waldor is the Anglo-Saxon word for glory. And it was a really important word, and I want to bring it back. It's in my dictionary of new words, some of which are old words I've reclaimed. And I believe my family have discovered a chap who's written a book called Lost Words. Some words are being axed. Well, I've been working on this for a couple of decades, and Waldor is one of the most important of the lost words. It meant glory, and a saint in Anglo-Saxon is someone that can make or manifest Waldor. Hence, a Waldor Maga, a Walder Maga, is someone that can make glory. And, God is the source of Waldor. God being an Anglo-Saxon word for this divine intelligence behind the matrix of absolute being. And there was another word which I love and want to bring back, and it's Waldorful. So if you see or you hear somebody, or you go to a lecture by an amazing scholar, let's say you can reincarnate and go and listen to Thomas Aquinas, giving his inception speech at Paris after he was made a doctor. I've read the text, by the way, it's come down in Latin. It was Waldorful. It was wonderful. Or let's say you can go to some little church in the Rhineland and hear Meister Eckhart preaching. Can you imagine that? Going and hearing him in person. Not through Matthew Fox or something, but actually coming from his heart. It would be wonderful. Well, that, my friends, is glory. And we should give Waldor to God, because God is the source of Waldor. So, what's incredible, the more you study, the more you compare and contrast and dig into the hidden matrix behind all these, the more you find they interconnect. In the Incan writing system, they didn't bother to write stuff down. Reality is far too amazing for that. What they did is they had knotted writing called kipu, which were long, dangly things which you made knots of different things, and they all had a meaning. It was like a sort of abacus type thing. And if you had a knot, 5 knots here and 6 knots there and 10 knots there, also the strings were male and female. So it was a sort of a conceptual matrix in which the knots represented either things or ideas or concepts or insights. And to me, doing the periodic table, looking into the background, is a bit like doing the kipu behind all these manifestations of world order, because that's all they are. They're all manifestations of the one world order. Well, what's the source of it? Well, the Lord of the worlds, Al-Amin, all the worlds, not just this world, not just the human world, all the worlds. So, let's be humble on this Pentecost 2021. The world's been suffering this terrible pandemic from reasons we don't know. We don't know why we've deserved this as a culture, as a civilization. We don't, we're in, many people are dying. More than 3.5 million people have died worldwide now. But I believe that we will find out, and we will come to understand, but only if we anchor back into our, truth, each one of us, spiritually. Okay, now I want to move on and talk about Judaism, because that's another world or system. Judaism is also premised, and this is what so upsets me about the madness of Netanyahu and his fanatical government. We now know, I've been doing a lot of research, it's come out in incontrovertible detail, that Israel sponsored and nourished the birth of Hamas to take down the secular authority of the Palestinians in Gaza. Israel actually wants extremists, because then it can up its ante and be more extreme too. And this is just a tragic fact of history. Now, you can explain it psychologically. We like to demonize the other so that we feel more self-righteous. It's the opposite of what I'm talking about. The universality of recognizing world order together is, no, I think you're the devil, you come from evil, so I'm going to bomb you and gas you and kill you. It's what the Nazis did against the Jews. This is the great tragedy of modern history. The very anti-Semitic hatred of Jews by the Nazis and other anti-Semitic forces, like Franco's fascist Spain. He also hated the Jews. In itself, then, I suppose it sort of created this kickback of an equal and sufficient force. It seems to be a law of political, physics that forces co-create each other. And Hobbes talked about this in his analysis of power as a kind of force field. I don't think enough work has still been done on this, and I've looked at this for my, PhD studies in terms of conflict theory and conflict resolution theory. More needs to be done on how we can resolve these conflicts, applying that mathematical analysis of conflict. And I've done this in my book on religious maths, because to me, peace is a religious duty of all humanity. I don't care if you're Muslim, Jewish, Christian, Baha'i, Zoroastrian, Druid. These are all just the manifestations on the surface of the pond. What we have to do is study the deep water, find what is the substance of water, and find what is the living water. That's the point of today, Pentecost. That's when the Spirit comes down, universally to all of us, not just because I'm Jewish or, I'm a Rasta or I'm a Zoroastrian. No, we're all in this together, guys. One planet, one universal Spirit. I therefore want to share today, in honour for my Jewish friends, because not everybody supports Netanyahu and his madness and his hysterical othering of Islam and Iran and Hamas and all the rest. He knows, or he's either very stupid or very evil. He ought to know that Israel itself created Hamas and funded it. And, also, somewhere in the files, in Mossad headquarters, is the fact that Yasser Arafat was assassinated by Israeli intelligence. They poisoned him. It was proved when he came to Paris to die in the hospital. They examined his traces, and he was poisoned with polonium, which is the thing of choice of advanced agent types. Well, it's, so, and this therefore meant that the Palestinian moderates, the secular, good Muslims and Christians wanting to live in harmony with Israel, they were deprived of their leader and their intellectual spokesperson. Abbas is, he is quite good, but he's old. He doesn't have the same charisma that Arafat did, and he hasn't got the same, I don't know what it is, it's not an easy job and he knows what he's up against, because he has a PhD from the University of Moscow. He's a very clever man. I wish him Godspeed in moving towards a Palestinian state. I'll come to that later. I want to share our Jewish friend. Today we have Rabbi Judah Magnes, 1877 to 1948. And I want to share his career with you because he's my kind of Jewish friend. I have so many Jewish friends scattered around the world. These are the guys I love. These are people that uphold the world law of universality that I'm talking about. Anyway, he was very influenced as a young boy growing up by the American experience and the freedom it gave to Jewish immigrants. He's an immigrant there, but he was a dissenter. As a young man, for instance, he criticized the Spanish-American War when the USA suddenly went all jingoistic, let's bash the Spanish. And it seems they faked an incident in the harbour in Cuba to trigger the whole war. Fake stuff. What does that sound like? He also grumbled at the pro-war Christian ministers who were suddenly all waving the Star-Spangled Banner and saying, let's get the Spanish. He said, it's ridiculous. He also attacked rabbis who joined in this USA bandwagon. They said, we're fighting Parsons. He was inspired by the ethical and religious message of Judaism's prophetic tradition, like Joel I just talked about, as well as Ahad Haham, who written about spiritual Zionism. By 1914, the year of the outbreak of the war in Europe, Judah Magnes was already well known. He served as a rabbi of a small synagogue in a working-class Brownsville in Brooklyn. Now, I know New York. I love New York. It's one of my other homes. New York Public Library, it's my other home, right? Columbia University Library, it's paradise. And the Jewish Jews College in New York, it's to die for. In terms of, New York is a very scholarly and amazing city, and this guy was at the heart of it. He became later a rabbi at Temple Emmanuel on New York's Fifth Avenue, which is like pretty mainstream. He got very involved in pacifism. As the war dragged on, he could see how ridiculous this world war was. Millions of people were dying. He believed Judaism just outlawed this kind of nonsense. He sent relief supplies to suffering Jews in Eastern Europe and Palestine. And he did his best to stop America joining this bloodbath. But once America came into the war in 1917, he became even more a pacifist in his sermons in the synagogue. He said, yes, Jews had a right to defend themselves from pogroms, like if you're suddenly being slaughtered by a mob, you can defend yourself. But war is a different matter. It's if you're a true universalist, God-fearing, world war-loving Jew, you shouldn't involve yourself in international war fighting. So in 1917 he joined other pacifists and anti-war activists such as Roger Baldwin, Eugene Debs, a famous socialist, and Norman Thomas, who all spoke at a famous meeting in Madison Square Gardens in New York against the war machine. They said, no, we intellectual, spiritual leaders oppose this. And he said, people grumbled and they said, what are you doing, a rabbi? What do you know about politics? Shut up, go away. It's none of your business. Well, he said, no. Do spiritual ideals have no validity in times of war? It's precisely when war breaks out that we spiritual elders should be speaking out. And I'm delighted to see that many rabbis in Israel and around the world did protest against this ridiculous bombing of Gaza and the jostling and attacks on Temple Mount that preceded it. I mean, that seems to have been deliberate provocation by Netanyahu, who was about to fall from power because an alliance was about to be made between the Liberals in the Knesset. Don't forget, 4 elections have taken place. Netanyahu's lost them all, but he still clings to power by dividing his opponents. It's the most unbelievable, Machiavellian stuff being going on. And I'll come back to that in a minute. So he also worked with other pacifist leaders elsewhere. He came into contact with British pacifist leaders, Ramsay MacDonald, who was the head of the Labour Party, an authentic Labour socialist leader, Philip Snowden, and Norman Angell. And so, it was an international movement opposing World War I, which I 100% would have supported. Romain Rolland in France was doing the same, who was a Gandhian. World War I was a ridiculous, stupid nightmare, and according to the work of some Scottish historians, it was a deliberate conspiracy done by the international financial interests coming out of the City of London to destroy the German people's state before it could become a threat and a rival. Those files need examining by historians. We should have a conference at the Institute of Historical Research at the University of London, where I used to teach in that university system, to establish the veracity or not of this. This is really, really important. But anyway, so this guy, this wonderful Rabbi Judah Magnes, working away with all these international pacifists, his work led to the establishment in 1918 of the Civil Liberties Bureau, which became the forerunner of the American Civil Liberties Union, and later the Bureau of Legal Advice for Conscientious Objectors. It's not enough just to say, I'm for peace. You've got to help people that are having the courage to come out and refuse to fight. And that's going on in Israel. People that are refusing to go into the Israeli Defense Forces, and they need backup, support. Same in every country in the world. Of course, he was harassed and investigated by the government, in the US. Like nowadays, they'd be spying on every phone call, email, whatever. And they still do. But he said to stop this war. He was published in the New York Evening Post. He called instead for the negotiation of a fair peace treaty. Well, isn't that what we're all calling for? Fortunately, the ceasefire has happened, but what we need is a full, complete, comprehensive peace treaty between Israel and Palestine. All parts of Palestine, including Gaza. Anyway, what happened next is this guy, his life is amazing, right? In the 1920s, he moved to Palestine, which was then a British mandate. And he was named in 1925 the first ever Chancellor of the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. Gosh, what a job. I've been to that place. It's a hallowed place for me. The library is to die for. Gershom Shalem's collection has been donated there. Hebrew University of Jerusalem is like a paradise of learning. And it should be open to all Palestinians and all Israelis that want to study, as it was when it was first set up. And he was the Chancellor, and then he became its initial president in 1935. And he worked for peace from that position. He became the moving spirit, along with Martin Buber, Henrietta Salt, and Ernst Simon, in organising a group called Ichud, Union, Oneness, which sought to plant the seeds for a binational state in the Palestinian Mandate, one that would emphasise reconciliation between Arab and Jew, and shared governance instead of unitary sovereignty of one over the other. Other alternatives, he believed, might bring conflict and war. This was a Waldorf observing rabbi who was now Chancellor, President of the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. And he was organising Ichud, Union. Well, my view, and Martin Buber, one of my other great intellectual heroes, was helping. My view is we should get out of the library, the archives, and all his work, by the way, is in the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. It's all there. We should get out of the archives all the work he did for this Ikhud movement, and we should reactivate it. This is still, what is needed. I mean, this is only like 70 years ago or something. And in God's eyes, prophet time, this is just last night, I mean, God and the prophetic intelligence work in a different time span to us humans, most of us. So we can definitely get this Ikhud movement going again and look at a two-state solution, because this is the spiritual foundation of a two-state solution, which Biden and every other person that spoke at the UN Security Council and General Assembly debates during this recent spat, they all said two-state solution, two-state solution. Well, let's do it, and let's get the metaphysics of it sorted by looking at our dear friend Rabbi Magnes and Martin Buber and all the others. Later, when Adolf Hitler came to power and the Nazis started their nonsense and smashing synagogues and then putting people in camps and gassing them and all that, he knew what was going on. And he renounced his absolute pacifism. He said Nazism was a greater evil even than war. And reluctantly, he endorsed World War II as a sort of righteous war. But he wanted that out of the ashes of war would emerge a vanguard of religious conscientious objectors who could lead to a new era. Now that's where I come from. My parents, who met during World War II, they lived, I don't know that they knew of Rabbi Magnes. They may well have heard of him. They certainly were in touch with leading thinkers and pacifists in, people like Einstein and all the rest in the 50s. And maybe I'm sure they'd heard of him. They had many, many Jewish friends in where they eventually settled in Montreal, many Jewish intellectuals who certainly would have heard of Judah Magnes. And he died in 48. Those first 3 years after the war was great times of hope. From 45 to 48, people genuinely hoped, like Judah, that we would go to a new era of peace and reconciliation. And that was all dashed by the Cold War, by this extremism of extreme capitalists hating the communists, extreme communists hating the capitalists, and this artificial divide, the Iron Curtain that Churchill talked about. Magnes was against all that. As a rabbi and a pacifist and a believing Jew and a Zionist and a Universalist, you see, I think it's possible to be that's what I call old school Zionism. They didn't want war and hatred with the Palestinians, wanted to work together. You see, Muhammad is a Zionist in his deep love of Israel, his deep love of the Holy Land, and his love of Jerusalem. It was the first Qibla to face Jerusalem in prayer. Muhammad was what I call old school Zionist, and so was Jesus. Obviously, he loved Jerusalem, that's why he went and taught there. And all the great prophets of history have loved authentic Zionism, as this guy, Magnes, but they're drowned out now by the fanatical sort of Israel state Zionists. Well, the state of Israel is not the fruition of these prophetic dreams. That was for the kingdom of God. That was for a house of righteousness, a house of prayer, not a den of thieves. And too much of modern Israel society work of, its defense forces and its hyper-tech espionage agencies and so on. This is a den of thieves. So anyway, if Judah was with us, he would be, I'm sure, joining me in this discourse. And on the centenary of his birth, that was in 1977, Leah Ben-Dor wrote in the Jerusalem Post the following: "The lonely road he walked is once more worth thought and study." Wonderful, understatement of the year, right? Of course it is, and we should all walk this path to peace again. So I've shared with you a Christian, an Islamic, and a Jewish perspective, and it seems to me that we can live in harmony here. These are they're all talking about the same universalism from their own perspective. But how can we do it? I mean, I sit like everyone else and watch, images of bombs falling in Gaza and, people being killed, children. I mean, Palestine is a very young society. Many of them are teenagers and under. You don't get to live very long if you're Palestinian. And so we have to find, the world community has to rally together all the people of moderate intelligence and moral intelligence. We have to create a system, a structure for the Palestinian people to flourish and thrive. Now, when Trump and Netanyahu put forward their plan, Peace to Prosperity, I didn't throw it away. I looked at it and I read it and I commented on it and I wrote 100 pages of footnotes. I still think there's something in that document, and although I hate to say it, because it was written by a couple of people that I don't think are very intellectually moral, but the people that wrote it behind the scenes, they put some good stuff in there. And so I think that should be used as a basis, with Biden's backup and others, to create the two-state solution. And, it would need severely rewriting. About 70% of it needs redoing. The maps need redrawing. But there are some fundamentals, like a port for Gaza, an airport for East Jerusalem, a railway connecting Gaza and the West Bank, freedom of movement for all pilgrims to holy sites in both Israel and Palestine, a demilitarized Gaza. There are many, many good things about this text, and I would support them. So, as chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for the Middle East, I mean, my contribution is just theological, religious, philosophical. I'm not a politician. I don't want to get involved in the, haggling over which bit of East Jerusalem should be ruled by which authority. What I want to do is get the spiritual unity of Ijad that Judah Magnes wanted, and Martin Buber and the others, and Sufi equivalents in the Islamic community and the Christian equivalents. That's what we all want. So we, this generation, have to do it, because enough is enough. We can't go on allowing the poor people of Gaza to be slaughtered like this. Now, of course, there's a very brilliant article in the New York Times, the international edition, a couple of days ago, saying, actually, this is exactly what both Hamas and Netanyahu want, is this constant, repeated mutual slaughter, which the Israelis are always going to win, but they'll lose a few, because it justifies and buttresses their own sort of, worldview. So the article, which I strongly recommend, I don't know if it's on the internet, it's by Thomas L. Friedman, who's a very good journalist and commentator. For Trump, Hamas and Netanyahu, it is always January the 6th. So this article in the New York Times, May the 18th, is seriously worth reading. And what it's saying is that, as I was saying, Hamas was created by Israel in order to destabilize and destroy the credibility of the Palestinian, largely secular, moderate, intelligent movement under Yasser Arafat. They created this fanatical thing, so they'd always have the excuse to divide and rule between the Palestinians. Now, it seems that this is part of a longer-term project for certain thinking circles, if you can call them that, within, let's call it hard right-wing Zionism. The idea of destabilizing Palestinian